Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of Warped Wednesday. Special in that it's our third episode, and we've only done that once where we've had 3 episodes, and this is that time.
Yes. In fact, going forward, this will be our first and only ever third episode. So very excited to join us here today.
We're going to commit to you right now. Thank you guys so much for coming through in the comments section and liking our videos and subscribing. It's because of that you've got us to our first and only third episode of Warped Wednesday.
But it won't be the first Nurgle number, because we're going to episode 3 and we're also going to have episode 7. I mean, knock on wood, we're going to make it to episode 7. But we've got a bunch of God numbers coming up. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this beautiful Nurgle theme. In the meantime, Wallace, my friend, looks like you're not filming from your usual location. Where are you right now?
I'm not on site at the Warphammer studio like usual. Today, I'm actually on vacation. I'm visiting some friends in the Philippines. And so I'm actually, I'll show you.
Oh, yeah. People would love to see.
Lovely.
Oh, no.
Lovely scenic pool. And I'm on hotel Wi-Fi. That's probably not the best. But yeah, this is not Alaska, folks.
I kind of want to drop what I'm doing and go fly over and hang out with you right now, because that looks beautiful.
Yeah, and I got all kinds of bevies with me, so I've been having a heck of a time over here.
Here, I've actually got my Alaska winter themed beer with me right now, so a little out of character for the episode. Cool. Well, I know you haven't been able to hobby much over the last week, obviously, given where you are. But I'm sure you've kept up with the hobby in some way. What's been your 40K hobby and your involvement over the last week?
So I was on an international flight for about 14 hours, and I did nothing but read the Chaos Knight Codex for 14 hours. I even read the lore sections. I read it cover to cover.
Oh, the lore sections of that codex are absolute back-to-back bangers. There's a lot of absolute gold there.
It's a kind of a mixed bag in that I really, really like certain sections of it. Sometimes it feels like they're just rehashing the same thing over and over again. So it'll be like, this guy says that people are worms because they're worm-like to them and they're small insects to the big people. And you're just like, okay, I get it. I understand the concept. Thank you. And then there's other times, like there's this whole section where it's from the perspective of one of the, I think it's like a night desecrator or something, as it's destroying this cityscape filled with iron hands, and really cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's overall a really solid book, both in terms of lore and in terms of what it has going on for it in the rules section, which honestly, the crunch in this thing, there is so much that you'll need to maybe not know to play the army, but there's so much you need to know to like optimize the army, which I thought was really cool. So
yeah,
one of the things I did, just because I had a lot of time to kill, right?
A lot of time, 14 hours exactly.
Mm-hmm. I put together a table with a legal pad of like all the different times that it would be better to do different kinds of despair, darkness, doom paths.
Okay.
And like, when is it right that I would do this way or this way, right? Like, what are the matchups that I can imagine in my brain where I might want the -2 leadership as opposed to this other perk?
And that's a powerful brain, so people are going to want to hear this.
I like, as a player, I don't like obvious power as much as most people. I feel like there's a lot of really strong obvious power households and builds. Was it called Comatus or Comentus household?
Comentus, yeah.
Yeah, that household has a lot of obvious power, like it's very strong, and I can see a lot of cool ways that you could build your army to just like table people super effectively with it. But that's not the kind of stuff that I'm drawn to in terms of like imagining the way I like to play the game. So I think we talked about this a little bit just over Messenger, but I do really like the idea of playing House Corvax or Corvax.
Yeah. So just for anyone that hasn't read the lore, House Corvax was basically a House Raven house that got lost in the warp and turned to chaos. So just like House Raven on the Imperial side is all about mobility and shenanigans, House Corvax is kind of the chaos mirror faction to that. And there's some shenanigans there.
It does. And it actually, so it wasn't just corrupted by chaos, it was corrupted by Bellicor. It's actually in the lore. It's lore friendly. And you know how I feel about Bellicor. Like, that's my boy. So that's also an aesthetic draw for me. They have a really, really cool household trait where you get to pick another one from the table, the Darkness, Doom, Despair table, and utilize that Harbinger bonus in addition to whatever one they got for the round, which really, like when I was talking about you going through the different pathways, that makes a lot of really interesting things possible. So yeah, I was just reading through that book. That was kind of my hobby thing for the week. Obviously, I'm not going to be worrying too much about 40K while I'm out here enjoying the lovely weather and food and all that. But that's been my thing. What have you been up to?
Other than reading the Chaos Knights lore section back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Let's see. No, in all seriousness, I haven't done a lot of hobbying over the last week. I've been playing around some Chaos Knights lists, got some practice games in with friends. And there's actually a casual tournament coming up this Saturday. Won't be bringing a comp list because it's a casual tournament. You don't want to be that guy. I probably might bring something fun, like bring out 3 Bloodthirsters together and do like a Council of Blood type list. So I'll have a lot of fun at that. The events, so for people that don't know, there's like the Ursa Minor events, and they're like explicitly super casual. Like, you're a jerk if you bring a try-hard list to these, in my opinion. Or like consider them competitive events. So I'm just going to bring like a bunch of Bloodthirsters. Like, tell me 3 Bloodthirsters in Scarbrand. Tell me that's not a fun list. It's an absolutely awful list, but you're going to have fun losing 3 games with that.
Well, it's fun for somebody, right? It's fun for somebody.
Yeah.
You'll still find a win with it.
Well, I mean, I don't want to win just because
especially
I'm not really dick.
Hey, man.
Go ahead.
You have the Stamp on Death axe relic.
That's true.
And it's good. Like, that's actually really good.
Yeah, especially Face Grey Knights, because then things will get really freaky.
I actually, like, towards the end of 8th edition, I played a list that was a monster mash with one of each of the greater demons. Just roided it out with the exalted words and relics and everything. I will say that my favorite one was the Bloodthirster with that stand up on death axe. It just felt really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of really cool moments that happened because of it. So hey, try it out. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, you take that, resurrect on death, combined with the wound cap. You've got a little spicy chaos soup going. Cool. So speaking of demons,
you do.
This episode, I've been asked all the time, what should you... Okay, let me take it one step back. There's a lot of chaos ideas like summoning that are fantastic in theory, but in practice, people are kind of wondering how they use that in their games. If you're playing on Tabletop Simulator or something, well, it's easy. You just clone in more models. But if you're going to a tournament, people are wondering, like, hey, like, what model should I bring to summon? Like, what's in your summoning box? And again, I don't think there's 2 people, especially you, 2 people on the planet that have experimented more with summoning ideas over the last few months in the current meta. So I kind of want to take a chance to talk about on today's Warped Wednesday, like what people should think about as summoning options, and also in practice, if someone's going to a tournament, like what kind of stuff they should bring in their summoning box at like certain point levels. So I'm going to let you kick off, Wallace. What are some big picture considerations you're making when you're considering what units to bring as summoning options?
So one of the big considerations you need to make on the units that you bring to summon is going to be your space in the box. What kind of box are you bringing? How are you carrying it? How much work do you want to put into moving that around the event hall? That's going to really determine what you exactly bring, because there's tons of edge cases for specific models to do specific things. But you are one person, and that one person has only 2 arms and only a limited amount of lower back strength. So you're going to need to make a decision at some point to cut certain things that potentially could be useful in some games because you physically are unable to bring that model to the table. It's different if you're playing in your hobby room at home and all the models are on your desk behind you. That is not going to happen in the tournament hall, or if you're visiting a friend's house.
Well, and also consideration is that the tournament you're going to, if you're, again, at a local location versus driving long distance versus flying. So no, for Seattle, you talked actually about Alpha Legion and Demons being a really cool toolkit list, and you thought the optimal list had some summoning points in it. I didn't bring any summoning points simply because I wanted to have like one list I bring and not worry about packing extra, because I already like to pack super light. I didn't want any extra stuff with me. Whereas you ran a lot of infantry, so you're able to kind of cram a lot of models together. So
and I don't have,
go ahead,
because otherwise I show everybody what it looks like. But essentially, I took one of the Citadel foam cases, the GW cases. I took most of the foam out because I'm a horde player, right? Like, I don't care. Stuff will break. I brought glue. And I took a bunch of thin ply cardboard boxes I got from various things that fit various sizes. And I kind of Tetrised them all together to use as much like vertical space as possible when stuffing the box with models. I find that if you're using regular foam, it takes up a ton of space in the box and it reduces the amount of options you have. I then made sure that I knew which of these cardboard boxes went, like I could visually identify by looking at the box which one had which type of model in it. So you could color coordinate that. I do that. Like I could look down into my summoning box and immediately see, oh, the green boxes, those ones have blue horrors in them. And so if I need a blue horrors, I can just reach into a green box. And that way it kept me organized throughout the event. So the first thing is organization of your box is super important. Use vertical space. If you have something really important you need to keep in foam, like your Bellacore is really nicely painted or something, obviously do that still. But I wouldn't worry too much about the horrors and stuff. They're easy fixes later. I think I lost Mike. Oh, and he's back.
Nope, not lost. I disappeared in the warp for a sec to go fight Calder Drago. But okay. So anyway, you were saying?
Yeah. So I was just saying, like, make sure your box is organized, color coordinate if you need to, separate out, take a big box and separate it out by a bunch of little boxes, utilize your vertical space. And again, identify how much labor you want to put into moving this thing around the event hall. One thing I've talked with you about, we don't currently have a sponsor, so I have no brands to recommend for you, wink, wink. But those trays, or like the carrying tray thing people have.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
They're like little carts. They're foldable carts that you can take on the plane with you or check in your baggage. And they will allow you to carry around your models and dice and display boards and everything a lot easier. I don't have one of those. They seem like a great investment to save yourself some time and energy moving between tables. At the end of every game, I spend maybe 10 minutes packing up and making sure everything's organized back in my box. And then I would carry my Citadel box to the next table. So you can save some time and energy if you brought one of those like tiered tray carriers. Then the last thing I want to hit on with summoning that's really important, and I could shake the camera if like it was for dramatic effect to demonstrate how important this is. It's more important that you use the models that you summon well than it is that you summon the perfect models.
Okay, well, so I'm going to cut you off. Please don't tell me I have to play well. Please. That's too far. Well, clearly we have to stop getting drunk at events. Keep going.
So, for instance, yes, there are situations where having like a Screamer of Zenich will be slightly better than if I just summoned another 9 flamers, or another 10 horrors. It does something different, and it has an interesting angle that it plays differently. But do I really want to pack that Screamer unit, which takes up space, for that slim percentage that it might maybe be better? Not really. And also, do I have practice with that unit? Is that a unit I'm really used to playing with? Not as much. So I would rather take models that I know that I can use well than I would bring models that might be slightly better to very specific situations.
Yeah. Well, and part of that too is so let's stop and quickly talk. If there are a few mandatory units to bring, I have 2 units in my mind that are mandatory units to bring if you're summoning. Just bring in your toolkit. One is Furies, because they've got 2 big advantages. One, cheap flying infantry always useful, but also they're the only unit that can be marked as any god. So literally Spring Furies, that means literally any character you have can always summon a Fury unit, regardless of mark.
Yeah.
So they're super versatile. Also the cheapest unit you can summon other than a Beast of Nurgle. Because again, the other cheapest would be like maybe 10 brims, but that's 50 points. It uses very few points to just summon some sort of unit. And the other unit I'm always bringing when I'm running summoning lists in my summoning box is a Herald of Slanesh. Because at 55 points, it's the cheapest Psyker we have access to. So often you're going to lose a Psyker and you've taken Warp Ritual or Psychic Interrogation, and you just need some warm body to do casts. Also, it's really useful if you're running a list of Be'lakor, because there might be some crazy situation where Be'lakor is stuck in combat in your turn, and just the threat of being able to summon Hysterical Frenzy and have Be'lakor fight 3 times in a turn kind of breaks people's brains a little bit.
Yep.
I think those are 2 mandatory models. What else are you always bringing?
Before I mention my kind of like short list, one other thing too, this is on when you summon the model, and it applies to that same logic of it's more important that you play the model perfectly than it is that you summon the perfect model, is that don't spend too much time thinking about what to summon. Spend more time thinking how you will use it once you put it on the table.
Cool. And that also includes where to place it, right?
Right. Where you place it. You don't need to spend about like the different scenarios where something could be better than another thing. Sometimes just be quick about it. Save yourself time. You're like, I'm used to summoning this unit. I'm good at summoning this unit. I know where I would put it, and then summon it and then play well with it. So an example of units that I would always bring with me, I really like having Plague Bearers in the box, at least one unit of 20. I bring 40 personally Plague Bearers in my box.
Okay.
Plague Bearers are really good against matchups where they have a high volume of damage 1 weaponry. It's very good into Tau as well because it has an innate -1 if you have a unit of 20 or more models, which if you pair with the Disciples of Be'lakor bonus, if that is what you are playing, you can get that to a -2, which offsets +1 to hits that your opponent might get, which can really, really punish certain shooting lists. So right off the bat, Plague Bearer is very strong.
Yeah, can't go wrong.
I've been bringing Demonettes recently. I'm starting to really like them.
Yeah.
They're better than summoning more Bloodletters if I need more melee. And what I like to do with them is I'll summon a big unit of like 20 or 30, and then I'll wreathe them in shades. So like turn 1, I can get like a bunch of pink horrors in people's faces. Then I summon a bunch of Demonettes behind them, and then I wreathe those Demonettes in shades. Again, it's a Disciples of Be'lakor summon thing, but that's
well, let's actually take a quick sec. So for people that don't know, one of the big advantages of Disciples of Be'lakor, which Wallace touched about in his brilliant video about playing Disciples of Be'lakor, was that summons have OBSEC and Disciples. They don't normally have OBSEC. So for example, Plague Bearers, if you're playing Word Bearers and you summon some Plague Bearers, 1, you're super cool for playing Word Bearers, so big shout out to you, you're a legend. But 2, they won't have OBSEC when they're summoned. Whereas in Disciples, it's brilliant because you can summon troops, as you're saying, put them down somewhere safe, wreath them, and then still have OBSEC when they go to contest objectives later. Also, I want to clarify one thing. You don't get your Locust on a summon unit unless you have a unit on the board that has the Locust, but they still keep their demonic role. So for example, like Demoness when summoned, even outside of Disciples in any army, will still have their fights first, their Quicksilver Swiftness, I think it is. Which makes them really useful late game, because often like being able to have like free interrupts or free fights first late game is super valuable. So yeah, can't go wrong with Demonettes. I love them. They fit a ton of small spaces. Keep going, Wallace.
They're also really good against like Harlequin because like a 10 mob, like also 10 mans with 10 sisters of Demonettes. And you can do this even if you're not like Disciples. This is utilitarian, like anyone can do this. Summon some Demonettes against Harlequins because it makes their charges a lot harder if you're screening with Demonettes. Because if units swing back at the Harlequin, they're going to lose a bunch of guys because it's just a high volume, well-statted attacks into them. So it's kind of unique because they don't want to multi-charge if they have to multi-charge into Demonette screens. So that's always an option for any list that has like fights first in it, which means if you're playing Slanesh, small units of Demonettes are absolutely your best friend against things like Harlequin because it makes their charge decisions a lot harder. and it punishes them if they do them poorly.
My dog's saying hello. Keep going.
Yeah. Another thing
So high.
Is getting some anteaters, some of those seekers, giving them an instrument. The reason you might want to do that is because it's going to be an 8-inch charge with an innate reroll on the unit. It just has a reroll charge.
Yeah. And that's no joke. And so if you have +1 in charge and a reroll, you go from 27% normally up to 66% or 67%, so a 2/3 chance. And I mean, again, you don't want to depend on that. There's a lot of situations where late game, you need to try to get back in the game, or like, again, it doesn't matter that much if you fail. It's really good odds, like just out of the blue on a summon. That's not bad at all.
Yeah, well, you can also summon 2 of them. So like an example of how I would do this is if I have a Master of Possession, I use Incursion, and then I use Demonic Pact. I'm going to summon 2 units. I'm going to summon 2 units at Anteaters, and I can know reasonably that one of those 2 units is going to make that charge. It's a good way to steal an objective as well. So that's a decent
here. And actually, so just again, for people at home that don't like math, which again, I totally understand. If you have 2 units of Seekers and they both have instruments and they're charging on Deep Strike, it's a 90% odds. Nearly, not guaranteed, but 90%, which is close to guaranteed, that at least one of the 2 squads is going to make it and just get some bodies on objective. And again, they've got those long bases, so they get that charge and get that distance. So they're blocking off huge areas of the board, like absolutely massive with those big bases.
Yeah, they're really good move blockers. 1, they can steal an objective. 2, and they can tri-point models that are sticking out a little bit too far. 3, I don't bring them with my Disciples list because I have other stuff that does similar things. But when I was not, like before Disciples of Eloquor existed, when I was just playing Chaos Undivided, I did bring units of Seekers in my box, and I did often find situations where I used them. So that's another option.
Well, and that's one of those things, again, we've talked about a local tournament versus flying to an event. If I'm flying to an event, I want to bring Seekers. But if I'm going to a local event, absolutely. Because there's like 10-20% of the time they're going to be the right call. I want to have that. But they're a little finicky and large to transport if you're flying. So maybe don't bother there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to mention that just as a couple other A tier or S tier units to summon, more horrors is always good. More pink horrors, more blue horrors, stones. Those are always critical. I mean, you're bringing them anyways, so bring a lot more of them just in case you want more of them, which you'll find that you often do. So bring more pinks, and that's something that I would always pack with me. And then is there any other critical ones I'm not thinking of? Heralds is in each.
Skull Altar. Oh, yeah, those 2. Yeah.
Skull, yeah. Skull Altar actually move blocks Knights.
It's a move blocking beast. Hello, Knights. Hello, Skull Altar. But yeah, talk about those Heralds of Tzeentch.
I'm going to talk about the Heralds of Tzeentch. So Heralds of Tzeentch is one of the best units to summon in terms of just getting a psychic caster. Because if you summon any of the variants of the Heralds are all decent. The Flux Master is a cheap way to teleport it around the board with Warp Portal. So it gives you a lot of mobility, and it's giving you that +1 strength aura, which can be really nice with a lot of Tzeentch lists, and it'll help you get a couple of key powers maybe. Or you can summon the Foot Slogging Herald and know that he's going to cast a power because for 1 CP, you can use Minions of Magic. Since you get to pick the power when you summon him, you can choose stuff that you wouldn't bring in a normal list. So like Treasonous Tzeentch. And let me tell you, Treasonous Tzeentch, that is one of the best powers in the game at making your opponent sweat. You'll summon it, and then they'll have to spend the next few thinking about it. For instance, I summoned it against John Lennon at the Seattle Major, and as soon as I summoned it, he went, "That needs to die now." As soon as I announced that I had Treason of Tzeentch, because he knew what I was going to do with it was push it up and have it try to treason his Flying Hive Tyrant. And yeah, statistically, that doesn't happen. I statistically am not rolling above that leadership. But the possibility that it could happen changes his entire way that he has to play the game, because if it does happen, he just would have lost the game.
Yeah, I almost feel like the threat of a Changecaster summon is way better against higher level players than maybe newer opponents. Because newer opponents would be like, yeah, whatever, I'm just going to move forward, not counter plan for it, and the dice will probably fail you. But good opponents will be like, yeah, you could go for that, so we have to play around that. Same thing with like being able to bring in an Infernal Gateway anywhere on the board. That's so huge.
You can bring Flickering Flame. I mean, there's all kinds of options.
Yeah. And so one thing people don't realize that, yeah, you don't, for example, if you only have a CSM detachment like Word Bearers again, because we're talking about the world's coolest player running Word Bearers, you don't have access to demon stratagems. But if you have a demon's detachment, you can use any of those stratagems on a demon's unit you've summoned from anyone else. So you can use it, for example, Manias of Magic, or you can use a stratagem like Flames of Change, the one for Flamers, which again I think are probably the only unit we haven't talked about that is really an S tier summon unit. Flamers, which I know you love your Flamers, Walls.
I was gonna get to Flamers kind of as the last little piece, which was
let's get there.
Yeah, Flamers are your thing that keeps people honest. Flamers are the thing that gives you shooting that they don't like to have hit them. And because Flamers exist, it makes your opponent have a lot more difficult, or have a lot more of a difficult time than just putting all their guns on the line and saying, I don't really care what you do. Because if they do that and you summon a good unit of Flamers in their face, like they're going to lose a bunch of models. It's really critical that we have those against Eldar. Otherwise, we'd probably just get tabled every game. Flamers are really good against specifically Eldar. They're also strong against Tau and Orcs and a variety of other like less high armor save models. Because they do mortal wounds, they're also decent against, like Space Marines. They're not amazing because the rest of their attacks are probably.
Well, they're decent into like Dreadnoughts and Intercessors. They're not great into like the natural 2-up save or Gravis because they have a strat for +1 damage. But there's still a lot of stuff. For example, again, if you don't have Flamers in the list, they won't be as in cover as much because normal demons list don't have shooting. Like, oh hey, Intercessors in the open, so these Flamers are coming down. And they're still going to barbecue some Marine bodies, as long as they're not like Terminators.
They're decent all-comers, and they also make you have a lot more angles of play because you can, for instance, have a game where it's really good to summon Flamers, or maybe it normally isn't, but there's a particular situation where if you summon in a certain spot, you snipe a really good angle on something they want to protect. That's part of why it's really good into Eldar, is if you're able to get the Flamer unit into the right spot, you can snipe one angle on like one of their bikes or one of their hawks or one of their fire prisms. You can do a ton of damage and sometimes even pick them off. It's just phenomenal. So I think Flamers are absolutely an S tier unit. You're not going to summon them every game, but you need them in your box in case you do. Or because your opponent will ask about your shooting, you can be like, I can summon Flamers. Now they have to think about it. So that's important. Your opponent have to think about the models that you can summon.
I'm so glad you got there, because I want to talk about the last point, is which you don't owe your opponent a full list of every model you've brought in your box. You can have like a box that's covered up, and it's like a mystery box. Anything can come out of there. Like, again, people will be like, yeah, cool, I can hold this back objective. And then you mentioned, well, I could summon a Soul Grinder to shoot units, like a little MS unit off the back objective, and suddenly like, oh, no, that's terrifying. I have to put like an actual unit there. In reality, your Soul Grinder, for example, I did this at Seattle. You mentioned you might be able to summon a Soul Grinder so someone put more on their back objective. In reality, I think the closest Soul Grinder was probably like 1,000 miles away back in Fairbanks at the time in Alaska. But you could have summoned a Soul Grinder, which, that's the thing. Or you could have summoned a Soul Cannon or a Skull Cannon.
What shooting I had said I could summon a Soul Grinder.
Yeah.
And he, oh, that sounds scary. And I'm like, it's not that scary. And then he asked for the profile of its shooting. Its profile does sound reasonably scary.
Yeah.
So I gave him, it's like, strength 8, AP 3, whatever, damage 3, something like that. I just read it off of, Battle Scribe. I've never actually used them. And he was like, what's the range on that? It's got a pretty far range with its
like 48 and like 72 on them, or something like silly on the big cannon. Yeah.
So I told him that. And he was an Eldar player. Yeah. And he spent the rest of the game having to like pre-measure around where I could pop summon a Soul Grinder, because I have in my summoning box, I have this area where it was the pink horror box. I turned it over, and it was the mystery box. He didn't know it was under.
Could be a Soul Grinder.
It could be a Soul Grinder. I'm never actually going to summon a Soul Grinder, but the fact that you could might very well be enough to force your opponent to have to play a different way.
Oh, and by the way, if you're one of Wallace's opponents listening to this, prepare for a game against him. He absolutely will summon Soul Grinder in the game against you, so you have to be very prepared for that.
Well, like at home, I've summoned Soul Grinders before if I was already winning, just because it's kind of a way to flex on your opponent.
It's like the ultimate style point. Ultimate.
Oh, yeah. And they're not as bad as people make them out to be, but they're also not good.
I'll say there's a world in which we're not going to get into it here. But there's a world in which people show up to a game and really don't want to have to shoot through Tzeentch Soul Grinders near a Changeling. I'm just saying. I'm not saying it's a good list, but it's a list.
And Soul Grinders are surprisingly decent into Tyranid Warriors specifically. So
just for anyone at home, don't summon Soul Grinders. But one day you may summon Soul Grinders. People need to respect that. But I do think that like skull cannons are unironically very good. Like throwing a long range shooting is damage too. You pop one of those bad boys there with a half damage strat. It's no joke. We'll do some, or maybe they have like a unit like that escape to their back lines with 1 wound left. You summon a skull cannon that shoots 36 or 48 and plinks off that last wound, which is very possible. Hits on 3s, numerous cover. I mean, it's something.
Plus, they have a big base that move blocks things, which is going to be really important.
Got a very chunky base.
So, like Tyranid don't like being move blocked. Knights don't like being move blocked.
No, they do not.
Orcs don't like being move blocked either, actually.
Yeah.
So those are things that you can kind of like zone them a little bit with a skull cannon. So
I also think, for example, the Slanesh Chariot, I think is a really, again, it's one of those things, don't bring it to a tournament. It's not worth flying with the Slanesh Chariot. But I think there's definitely a world in which the Exalted has 12 wounds for 80 points that are T5 with a 4-up, 5-up. There's a world in which you plunk down your back. Again, it's one of those things where you have to know the opponent's army well and what kind of firepower they have. If all they have is like bolters and stuff, maybe you don't want to summon 10 Hoarders, maybe you want to summon a Slanesh Chariot. They have to shoot through T5 with a massive pool of wounds for really cheap. And so they're like, you know what? I don't make that play on the back objective because there's Slanesh Chariot there. There's a lot of niche things, but I would say most important takeaway here as we get towards the end of the episode is that, as Wallace said, know how to use your summons well and keep the threat of any summon in mind for your opponent.
Yeah. And again, this is my biggest piece of advice. It's more important that you use the model you summon perfectly than it is that you summon the perfect model. So think about how you're going to use the model that you bring in. Don't spend too much time worrying about which one is the right one. Sometimes just commit. I need obsec bodies. This one works. Or not obsec bodies. I need more bodies on objective. This one works.
Unless you're playing Disciples, in which case you can bring down some beautiful obsec bodies. Yeah.
But I need more bodies on the subjective, or I need to screen this area. Don't worry too much about whether or not like a Plague Bearer is 5% better than a Brimstone or than a Pink Horror squad in this matchup or against the shoot it. That's a waste of your time. Spend more time thinking about where you're going to put those models to screen well or screen perfectly.
Yeah. And also think about the firepower they have. Because as you say, if they have a lot of like eradicators coming towards you, it doesn't really matter whether you put like Brimstones versus Demonettes versus Plague Bears there. They're all kind of doing the same job of being super inefficient with that firepower. Or all they have is anti-horde, putting down like Slanesh Chariot or something larger, or like Beast of Nurgle. And we'll come down to some really chunky boys with that T5 and that Feel No Pain. So again, think of the general class of unit and then just put what's in the box. Most importantly, bring some Heralds, because probably, I would say, honestly, 2 Slanesh Heralds is very possible to have on the battlefield. Bring a couple of those. Khorne Heralds are a lot less important because they can't get the Crimson Crown. But again, you can't go wrong with cheap Psychers, you can't go wrong with cheap bodies, and you can't go wrong with the threat of a Skull Cannon. Now, Wallace, right before we wrap up at the end here, one final unit we haven't mentioned that you've summoned in-game.
Okay, so real quick, this one actually is perfect. If you are playing like a dedicated god faction like Nurgle or Tzeentch or whatever, the amount of options you have changes, right? You're going to bring all the stuff codex. And I would pretty much bring everything that goes with your codex with those armies because you have a lot more space, because it's not dedicated to all of these undivided troops and stuff. So for instance, if you're Nurgle, there's times when the Piper is beautiful. It's going to give your Nurglings advanced charge. That turn 1, you really get the opponent's face. Or, Tzeentch, you might summon a Changeling into a good specific position, or you might find that there's a scenario where an Exalted Flamer would be good, or a Chariot would be good. Same thing with Slanesh. Like the Chariots sometimes are really strong, sometimes the Fiends are really powerful. If you're playing like a dedicated god faction, probably just bring your whole book, like what's in your book, the data sheets in your book, and find the scenarios that work best for them. Because again, like I said, there's 1,000 different scenarios. I'm operating off of the assumption that you're playing Chaos Undivided, but if you're not, like for instance, like Plague Drones are phenomenal against Eldar.
Great summon,
they're really spindly models that I wouldn't pack in my undivided box because they take up a lot of space. But if I was playing just Nurgle, having a unit that I can summon of like 5 of them is really threatening to our players because I can summon them up the midfield and
that
the
makes
next
complete sense.
Yeah, and Death's Heads do damage. So always leave your options.
Yeah, and the great thing is now, if you're ever in a tournament and your friends ask, hey, what's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? You can finally answer with all of your beautiful summoning options. Hey, everyone, thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Warped Wednesday. As always, have fun, stay safe, and may the dark gods bless your rolls. Goodbye.
Bye.